The Electronics Entertainment Expo, or E3 if you want to serious about this, is known for many things. Mind-blowing presentations from the biggest developers, fascinating presentations from indie developers, underwhelming presentations from weird developers, and toe-curlingly embarrassing presentations that make you want to turn yourself inside out. But it's also known for its massive lies. Whether they were features that fell through, fabricated cutscenes, misleading trailers, or developers promising fans the moon on a stick, there have been many broken promises since the first E3 in 1995. And today we are going to be covering some of the biggest whoppers we can think of. So grab some popcorn and be sure to not sit too close to your screen because there's going to be a lot of growing noses today and they might have your eye out. I'm Peter from TripleJump, and here are the 10 biggest lies we were told at E3. Number 10. The size of the Xbox One S. The Xbox One S saw a lot of critical and commercial success, but when it was first unveiled at E3 2016, something wasn't quite right. While showing off the features during its slick presentation, Microsoft flashed up a diagram of its size compared with the original Xbox One unit, touting that it would be 40% smaller. Now, I'm not very good with numbers, but even I can see the issue here. What's shown in the diagram isn't 40% smaller, and it gets even more obvious when you compare it to the final version. So what happened here? Well, prepare for some intense maths. The Xbox One console measured around 439 cubic inches. 40% of that amount is 175.6 cubic inches, but that isn't 40% smaller. To get that, you need to subtract 175.6 from 439, which gets you to 261 cubic inches, the actual size of the Xbox One S. Quite a difference, I know. Admittedly, this is more of a semantic issue than anything else, and some of the audience probably knew exactly what they were getting at when they said 40% smaller. Many others didn't, however, and were perhaps a little bit confused when they first got it out of the box. Number 9. Aliens Colonial Marines. Oh boy, where do we start with this one? In fact, you probably thought it'd be number 1, didn't you? The controversy around Aliens Colonial Marines has been covered too many times to count, even just on this channel.
Wake up! Oh, sorry,
For God's sake.
Press right trigger to die.
But for a very brief overview, Gearbox was paid by Sega to make the game. They took the money and then made Borderlands and Duke Nukem instead. When Sega found out, Gearbox outsourced the game to various smaller developers while denying it all the way to the bank. And the result was, well, this.
Why would that ever be allowed? Would you like to look at my jam?
I think you were meant to see an alien, but it was just so poorly done.
During E3 2011, Gearbox showed off an 11-minute walkthrough of the game. There was much to see here, but you should probably focus most of your attention on that large work-in-progress text, because as it turns out, that was the most important part of the demo. It promised graphical fidelity, intelligent AI, sinister atmosphere, and tons of levels. The actual game that was released, though, was, well, let's say different.
Oh.
Levels and gameplay features seen in the trailer were missing, the creepy atmosphere was gone, and so was the fog, revealing that xenomorphs aren't scary when you can see them scurrying around in the open on the other side of a cavernous room. All of this on top of the infamous typo that made the AI artificially unintelligent just goes to show how little care went into getting this one ready for release. In space, no one can hear you scream for your money back. Number 8. Killzone 2. Sometimes lies are found out pretty quickly and the backlash is swift. Other times they sit there like an open can of beans on the edge of a shelf for years before someone finally spills them. When the PlayStation 3 was announced at E3 2005, the Killzone 2 trailer was shown to demonstrate the power of the new console. However, when the game released in 2006, it didn't look much like what the trailer had promised. For the next few years, people people assumed that the whole thing had been a dirty trick, before one of the developers finally told their side of the story in 2008. The trailer had actually been a, quote, target render, showing what the team was aiming for and not the set-in-stone promise that fans had assumed. At the time, the team hadn't even properly figured out how to make the game run on a PS3. This isn't the only time audiences mistook target renders for final product trailers, but it's also not the only time you could forgive them for doing so. Studios could certainly do a much better job of making it clear what they're showing off by, I don't know, maybe saying, "This is a target render," before playing the trailer. Just a wild idea there from me. You can thank me later. Number 7. No Man's Sky. Yeah, it's the other entry you thought might be number 1. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, well, shame on you again because you're a completely different developer at a completely different company. While No Man's Sky has come on in leaps and bounds since its release, Hello Games made a lot of promises during development that they just didn't keep. The E3 trailer promised not just the moon, but the universe, full of giant sandworms, dynamic physics, herds of wildebeests sweeping majestically, you name it basically. But when the game was released, fans realised that the multiplayer spacefaring adventure, full of space combat, vast environments, and thousands of hours of exploration and animal naming, was actually a quiet single-player campaign in a rather empty universe. Among the many missing features were both smaller but forgivable gripes, such as the absence of radio chatter, space fleets, and ringed planets as seen in the promotional material, but also major absences that seemed like huge oversights: the ability to name your ship, space pirates, large-scale battles, rivers, sand and water planets, multiplayer servers, and butterflies. With fans spending a lot of time and effort cultivating complex spreadsheets laying out all the promises not kept, you can see just how disappointed they really were. The audience clearly had a lot of dedication, but not really the kind that Hello Games had hoped for. Number 6. Project H.A.M.M.E.R. Oh, we do have fun here at TripleJump. During E3 2006, Nintendo showed a highlight reel for brand new Wii games, including Mario Galaxy, Twilight Princess, and Sonic and the Secret Rings, the latter being an apology note in the form of a game for the existence of Sonic 06. But they also showed Project H.A.M.M.E.R, a brand new beat-em-up in which you commit assault and battery with a giant tool. It seemed like a fun excuse to wave your arms around and potentially cause some battery of your own if anyone happened to walk past while you were playing. Then, like all those kids at my 9th birthday party, it failed to show up. It turns out that Nintendo had an internal review in 2009 after Western staff at the studio claimed the management had been bigoted against them because they weren't Japanese. Sidestepping that incredibly delicate issue, Nintendo decided to just scrap the game. There were also reports that the motion control had never felt satisfying to play in the first place, which might be a fair enough reason to cancel it, or I don't know, maybe you could just keep working on it until it's better. That's kind of what development is, isn't it? Number 5. Fable: The Journey. Renowned teller of video game porcupines, Peter Molyneux, could frankly have a list all to himself. Now he insists he's told no lies whatsoever, he's just broken promises. But regardless of what you actually call it, the fact is, he says a lot of things, and many of those things don't come to pass. The 5th entry in his once revolutionary fantasy series, Fable: The Journey was revealed at E3 2011, with a gameplay demo showing a pretty solid first-person Kinect game, if you're into that kind of thing.
I'm doing exactly what it's telling me to do. The fact that I'm even completing the move in the first place is an absolute miracle.
It also looked like it was on rails. But wait, Peter Molyneux clarified that no, the game was not on rails. During a press conference, he even wrote "It's not on rails" on the wall behind him, and made a tally of how many times he'd stated that Fable: The Journey was not on rails, even getting journalists to sign the wall just to make sure that everyone in the room had it in their heads that it was not on rails. It was on rails. It was on rails and always had been, with gameplay taking place on a horse-drawn wagon riding along in a very straight and linear path that you could not deviate from because it was on rails. Still, definitely not on rails did actually end up as an achievement, so it's good to know that the team has a sense of humour about the whole thing, if nothing else. Here's hoping the fans who bought the game were just as amused at having been duped into buying a game that they probably didn't actually want. Number 4. The Phantom Dust Reboot. The pain of being a fan of a cult hit is that, by definition, it rarely gets the recognition it deserves, be that the development of a remake, a sequel, or even the courtesy of just being acknowledged by the studio. However, sometimes miracles occur, and a decade after its original release, Microsoft revealed at E3 2014 that they had picked real-time strategy game Phantom Dust for a full reboot. The cinematic trailer didn't actually show any in-game footage, but the short scene delighted fans nonetheless, and horrified the developers. The relatively small Darkside Studios had been chosen to remake the game, with a number of difficult demands from Microsoft. But the trailer wasn't Darkside's doing. Microsoft had gotten someone else to make it, meaning the trailer didn't have any of the game's assets, and actually didn't match the art style at all. To add insult to injury, Microsoft didn't even let Darkside say that they were the ones working on the game, for some reason. After producing a vertical slice that Microsoft loved, Darkside told the company that to properly reboot the game with all of the demanded additional features, multiplayer app, and single-player campaign, they would need a much bigger budget than the $5 million Microsoft had offered. Microsoft then dropped them like a hot potato, shuttering all development and essentially killing the studio. That'll teach them to ask for the resources necessary to do their jobs, which we made more difficult for them. A remaster of Phantom Dust was released in 2017, but it wasn't the ground-up remake that had been promised. Oh, and also, it reviewed notably worse than the original. But hey, at least uber-rich megacorporation Microsoft saved some money, eh? Number 3. Watch Dogs. Ah yes, the other game that you thought would be number 1 in this list. Unveiled during E3 2013, the Watch Dogs gameplay trailer stunned the audience with its next-generation graphics and innovative gameplay, becoming Ubisoft's most pre-ordered new IP at the time. However, when it was finally released in May 2014, the game looked a little bit different to what people had been expecting. Comparing the released version to the trailers showed that the game had taken a huge graphical downgrade. The environmental effects, lighting engine, water interaction, NPC behaviour and models had all been scaled back. Of course, the game did go on to gain enough praise for 2 full sequels, but this misleading trailer remained a sticking point for many. Since the game's release, there have been many post-mortem articles outlining the technical aspects of the game. There's also been plenty of theorising by fans as to why the high-definition effects shown in the trailer were not included in the final product, with many assuming that the tinier details, such as water interacting with car headlights, were massively affecting the frame rate in the final version of the game. But why did Ubisoft and any of the aforementioned publishers and developers show a trailer in the first place if they knew it wasn't indicative of the final product? Well, that can all be explained with number 2, gameplay demos in general. Oh, it's a wildcard entry. Happy E3, everybody! Gameplay demos have been an integral part of E3 since the early days, showing off snippets of titles currently in the works. However, as we've seen, these demos aren't always representative of what the final game looks like, and this is where things get tricky. Studios want to be able to not only provide some evidence that the games they've announced are actually being worked on, but to also give you a taste of what you can expect from the product in question, and showing a clip or trailer is obviously the best way to do that. But developers can't exactly show you the version they have currently sitting on their computer, for the same reason that Pixar doesn't show you those rough hair physics demos when trying to sell tickets for their new movie. To show a true demo of a work-in-progress game would reveal a lot of missing assets, unfinished animation, and poor graphics, which wouldn't represent the intended final product properly. Often then, the trailers and demos shown at E3 are examples of what the team are aiming to create by the time the game is finished. But sometimes these guesstimations aren't quite in line with what we end up getting. Now, as long as everyone's on the same page about that going into an E3, we can see the work in progress label and agree to take things with a pinch of salt. However, the problems arise when this trend is abused, with studios actively misleading customers into pre-ordering a game that they know is going to be nowhere near as good as what they promised. Sorry to put a non-game specific entry at number 2, but we wanted to take some time in this video to talk about the issue in more depth, and I'm sure the editor has done a wonderful job of including some more good examples on screen. And number 1, Project MILO. Peter Molyneux returns, this time with a super secret project that would sound incredibly sinister if it weren't him running the show. Project MILO is more like if GLaDOS was a child programmed by Mr. Bean. The game was announced in 2006 as a, quote, emotional AI for the Kinect during E3 2009. The game was basically a virtual boy in the most literal sense. Players would talk to MILO, interact with him, and build up his internal vocabulary. Teaching him to skip stones seemed innocent enough, but then you also guide his life choices, such as whether or not to crush a snail under the soles of his trainers, which feels far more involved than I'd really like to get with this boy. Then, in September 2010, there was news from the developer that MILO had broken out. No, sorry, I mean that work on the game had been halted. I don't know why I said that. The best part was that Microsoft denied that it had ever been announced as a game or product in the first place, despite Molyneux's previous insistence on the matter. To be honest, alarm bells should have been ringing from the outset when it comes to this game, and not just because Peter Molyneux was attached. The fact that the film camera recording this demo can see MILO looking at the woman who's playing the game means that from the point of view of the player looking at the TV screen, MILO is looking off to the right and not at her. This demo was made very much for the people watching at home and not for the person playing the game itself. Grimly, Lionhead creative developer Gary Carr confirmed that some of the Kinect features from Project MILO had been taken and reused in Fable: The Journey. Confirmed, Project MILO was not on rails. Still, while it's nice to know that Project MILO led to something that someone somewhere may have enjoyed, it's even nicer to know that, like the Kinect itself,
he's dead now and he's never coming back.